Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and this is my card for this week's Color Throwdown Challenge. So I pulled out the new Dancing Fruits stamp set from Simon Says Stamp, and I pulled out some masking tape here, or some post-it tape, and I'm going to stamp the images I want to use onto that with some Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink. The type of ink I use to stamp when it comes to mass is kind of irrelevant, but since I was planning on using this anyway, it was just a convenience factor. So I stamped the 3 images onto the post-it tape, and then I trimmed them out with my scissors. And when I trim mass, I either cut right on the line or slightly inside the line. That creates the best mask. If you're cutting on like the outer edge of the line, sometimes you'll end up with a little bit of ghosting along the edges. So that's what, especially if it's something with thicker lines, I like to cut like pretty much right down the middle of it, roughly. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it does help with the mask. And after I use these masks, I just store it with the stamp set. I just stick them to the backing sheet that the stamps come on. And then this way I can get more use out of them the next time I go to use it. If I want to use these masks again, they're good to go. So after I cut out all my masks, I have some Ranger Distress watercolor paper here. And I have the smooth side facing up. And I'm stamping the images kind of clustered together. So I stamped the pair, masked it off, stamped the second pair, and then I stamped this little lemon image and then masked that off. And then I moved the mask to the second pair so that I could stamp this apple so it looks like it's behind everything. And ended up not needing that apple mask at all. But like I said, I can save that, use it for a future project. So once I had everything stamped, I peeled off my masks so I could set them aside. And then I pulled out some Distress Oxide inks to color these images in with. I just got the new second set that came out of all the inks and already am in love with them, even though I haven't used them. But I've had them sitting on my desk and been showing them off to everyone. So I decided to smush the colors I wanted to use onto my little art impressions palette. You could totally just smush this onto pretty much anything non-absorbent. So like the plastic packaging, the stamps come in. I've shown all sorts of things over the years that you can use. I just really like this little art impressions palette because it's got the white and it cleans off really easily. So I'm just picking up the color with my water brush and watercoloring these. The only ones I actually went a little extra effort with was the pears, just because pears generally have, you know, a little bit of yellow, sometimes a little bit of red. So I added a little bit of yellow and then ended up adding a little bit of red after the green had dried a little bit so that they're not totally mixing together and creating a muddy color. And these dry fairly quickly, so it just worked really, really well. And I just kept it simple. Just wanted to add the color, let them dry, and then I can go in and trim all these down with my scissors. I wasn't sure at first if I was going to just trim this with like my paper trimmer and just have like a strip of cardstock. But once I was done coloring these, I decided I wanted to fussy cut these out. So I grabbed my scissors again, and I just went along and completely fussy cut out this image, which actually didn't take very long because they're fairly simple outlines. So the only part was that one little center part, but I'm going to deal with that once I get this completely trimmed out. And this time, obviously, I'm trying to trim right on the very outer edge of the line. But again, I don't worry about it being trimmed completely perfectly because I have a little hack for that once I'm done. So I got everything trimmed out, and then I'm using one of my pen blades here to trim out this little center area. And I gotta say, I really love these things. They are insanely sharp. You need to be insanely careful with them. But I also like how you can easily just press a little notch and the blade goes back in. So I just try to make a point of always keeping these stored with the blades inside the little unit so I don't end up slicing my fingers off or something. So once I was done cutting that little inner part out, I'm just using my Memento Tuxedo black marker and very lightly going along the outer edge of this entire piece. And this covers up that exposed white cardstock as well as any little areas that I didn't trim perfectly. So it just makes it look more finished and complete. So I did all that. Then I got a second piece of that distressed watercolor paper out and just a random piece of acetate that I had sitting around, and I'm smushing on another one of the Distress Oxide inks. This is the Peacock Feathers, the new Peacock Feathers that is just beyond gorgeous. I could just rave about these. Oh, like, you guys are going to listen to me rave about them tons, I'm sure. So I smushed the ink pad onto the acetate, sprayed it with a little bit of water, and then I'm just pressing the acetate onto this watercolor paper, just kind of going back and forth. Like, I want to create a fun, like, splattery effect. So I super sped this up just because I was messing around quite a bit with it. And some of the, like, more blobby areas, listen to me being all super technical, I'm just picking up with a dry baby wipe that happened to be sitting on my desk so that it wasn't too wet. And then I quickly dried this first layer with my heat tool, and then I went back in with that same piece of acetate and just pressed on some more of it, and then sprayed it with some more water, pressed that on, and just kept doing that kind of in a few layers. Did about 2 or maybe 3 layers of that. And then after it was dry, I sprayed it with my distress sprayer, let that sit for about 30 seconds or so, picked it up with my paper towel, and then I did it a second time to really get that fun water splatter look. And then dried that again with my heat tool before running it through my Big Shot machine with one of the Simon Says basic rectangle dies. So I die cut it, set it aside, and then I have the new Big Greetings 1 stamp set and a scrap of black cardstock. So I decided to use the thanks greeting for this card, and I used my anti-static powder tool on the black cardstock. And then I inked up the stamp with Simon Says clear embossing ink and stamped that onto the cardstock. And then I'm going to coat that with my Hero Arts white embossing powder. And I'm just going to pour that over the stamped image, over my little coffee filter here, so I can funnel that back into the container when I'm done with it. And then using my heat tool yet again, this time to melt all of that embossing powder. So once I've got everything melted, I can then trim this down with my paper trimmer. So pulled out my paper trimmer, used the little wire guide in the center to kind of eyeball it to make sure I trim this evenly. And then once I've got that trimmed, I wiped off the powder or the anti-static powder. I just wiped off with my fingers. And I cut a notch down the center of this. And then you meet up the notch with each corner in the scissors to cut a nice little flag end. And then, yeah, remove the anti-static powder. And I'm going to adhere that to this little splatter piece with a piece of foam tape. And I just line everything up kind of on my grid mat here to make sure I've got everything straight. And then for this little cluster of fruit, I did the same thing. I decided to just run another piece of foam tape right across the back of it. And then adhere that right above the sentiment. And then to kind of pull in some more of those colors that I used, I went through my stash and pulled out some of my Doodlebug sprinkles. So I've got some Bumblebee, some Limeade, and some Ladybug sprinkles here. So I'm just going to kind of scatter those onto my card front, like I said, just to kind of pull out the more, like the red, the yellow, and the green. Because like I said, this was for a color challenge. So the colors were like red, yellow, green, and kind of a blue sort of a color. So once I added my sprinkles, I wanted to finish the inside of the card before I adhere everything. So I just decided to stamp these outlines with those same distressings. I thought that would look really just cool and just an easy way to kind of finish the inside of the card. So I inked up each stamp with its coordinating kind of color of Distress Oxide and just stamped them in the same kind of orientation that I used on the front of the card. So kind of keeping everything with continuity and all that. So I did that, and then I adhered the watercolor splatter background to the card front with some foam tape. And once I had that adhered, I have this bottle of clear Pico embellisher still sitting on my desk from a previous card. And I wondered how that would look by just adding some little glossy elements to these images. So I ended up just lightly dabbing and just basically doing little dots, little clear dots all along the kind of dotted areas of these stamps. And it just kind of added a little extra something. And then I went along and added little lines to the leaves and to the stems to give that little glossy line. And because I could never leave well enough alone, I decided to add some to the background as well. So I just went along and just started dotting along on the background, kind of clustered more around where those little sprinkles were, because I didn't want to cover the entire background. But I was really liking how this would look. And because the Pico embellisher is a fairly thin product, it dries fairly quickly normally, but because I only did little dots and not like, coating the entire image, this dried really quickly, like under 20 minutes, and it was completely dry. So I turned on my phone here to try and show the shininess. It is kind of hard to see. You can see it better in the photos, which I will have on my blog as well. So yeah, that finished off my card for today. So as always, I will have a link below the video to my blog post with links to all the supplies used, and the pictures and all that info will be in the description box below the video, so check that out if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping my videos, and I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye!